If you're new to Airtable, you might feel a little underwater when it comes to learning the formulas. Maybe you've come from Excel where you're accustomed to a lot of math-heavy formulas, but in Airtable, things are a little different. Formulas function differently, and you're going to use them for things that you're not accustomed to if you're coming from spreadsheets. So in this video, I'm going to be sharing with you my power trio of formulas. Once you master the 3 simple functions that I'm sharing in this video, you'll be able to complete over 50% of all of the functions or formulas you'll ever write in Airtable. So if you're ready to start mastering Airtable formulas, stick around and let's get into it. Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Gareth and this is Gap Consulting, and it's our mission here to help you unlock the full potential of Airtable and related no-code tools. And in this video, as I said, we're going to be diving into the power trio of formulas. I'm going to share with you 3 functions that you can start using immediately that are going to relate to almost all of the formulas you'll ever write in Airtable. But before we get into this, I want to first invite you to join me for some free training. Grab my Airtable crash course, and it will be delivered to your inbox when you sign up at gapconsulting.io/Airtable-crash-course. This crash course is going to go through the basics of building an Airtable. From linking tables to building interfaces to simple formulas and functions, you're going to get a crash course on all of this, perfect for Airtable beginners. So go ahead and sign up for free at the link below. But without further ado, let's go ahead and hop on into my screen, and we're going to kick off with my first favorite formula. I promise you, if you can master this one, you can do pretty much anything. This is the if statement. We're going to be looking at this sample database. Imagine we've got these tasks and we have these different status fields. So you've got the possible task status of in progress, on hold, canceled, or done. What we care about here is receiving some sort of visual indication that tells us if a task is complete or not. And I want to highlight for you the key difference here already between spreadsheets and Airtable. All of the formulas that we're going to be working on here are not numeric based. They're not giving us a mathematical or a numeric output. Instead, these formulas are going to give us some sort of text or emoji output, with the exception of the last one. So first, we're going to dive into this if statement. And again, we're looking at that status field, and all we care about is when is it done. If a task is complete or done, then we want to show in our formula the output of, let's say, a checkbox. And if it's not done, then we want to use, let's say, an hourglass. Notice that I'm also using emojis. This is not something that you're going to see a lot in spreadsheets, but in Airtable, it's game on. So let's break it down inside of our formula. First, we're going to go and use the formula field type. And right now, I just have a blank field just filling out. So we're going to get rid of that. This is what you're going to see when you start building a formula. And the first thing we want to do is put in the formula name. Very different from a spreadsheet. There is no equal sign here. We don't have to tell it we're writing a formula other than by saying this is a formula. The field type tells Airtable all it needs to know, so we don't need an equal sign. We just start with the formula we're using, and in this case, it's an if. So if, and notice that when we start typing that, we get this pop-up down here with different things that we might want to be working with. And on the side here, you can see what the formula syntax is. So in the case of an if statement, you see we have some logic first, then a comma, then we give it a value, and then a comma, and then a second value. So the way that an if statement works is very similar to Excel, with the exception that in Airtable's case, when we write a formula, we have to reference an entire field, not a specific cell. So we're going to reference the entire status field instead of a specific cell within a record. So we're going to say if, and we're going to open, close those parentheses. I like hitting carriage return here so that I can put my different variables on separate lines. So first I'm going to say if, and I'm going to reference that status field. I start typing status, and I see it selected down here. When I make that selection, notice that this turns purple. This is an indication that this is referencing an entire field. Now, what we care about is the output of that status. We want to know if it is done. So we will say if status equals done. And done, because it's a string or text, this has to match exactly how the status field looks. So if done is in lowercase, then I need to make my output here also all lowercase. Just bear in mind that this has to match exactly. It can be inside of a single or a double quotation. Now that's our logical component. That is the logic that we're applying. If the status is done, we want to do something. We want to say now, comma, and I'm going to hit carriage return again so that we go down to the next line. What is the output that we want if that logic is true? If the status is done, I want to show a checkbox. So inside of quotes again, I'll use the checkbox. Now I'm going to bring up the emoji menu on my computer. For me, I'm on a PC. It's the start plus the period on my keyboard to bring that up. That's a little hotkey. So I want to bring in here the checkbox. So I'm going to start typing checkbox or check mark. And this is the one I want, the check mark button. So let's initiate that. So notice that when I select that, it brings it into my formula here. This is the output if the logic is met. But if the logic is not met, what are we going to do? Well, in that case, we're going to hit comma and return again. So I'm now on the third line. This is where we're going to give it the output when the conditions are not met. So again, inside of quotations, because it's a string, I'm going to use my single quotes and then hit start and period to bring up my emoji menu. And this time I'm looking for the hourglass. So let's go ahead and find it, bring the hourglass in, and save that formula. This is going to now automatically output based on the status field. So if it is done, the formula will show a checkbox, and if it's not, it will show this hourglass. Notice that we can update the status, and once we do, the formula automatically updates as well. The key difference between Airtable's formulas and Excel or a different spreadsheet tool is that we are referencing the entire field. So I'm not pointing this at a specific cell. This is the status field in general. So when I write this formula, I'm looking at all of these status for every single record all the time. So whatever changes are made here, once it's moved to done, that's when we're going to see the formula update and give us the checkbox. So just like that, we've written our first formula, the if formula. Remember, 3 components. The first one, logic. Second one, output if true. Third one, output if false. Let's move into the second formula. This one is very important for beginners as well. It's the switch formula. Now, you've already learned the if function. We just did that. And you might say, hey, I care about the priority here. Depending on the priority, I want to output something. Like maybe if it's low, I want to output a green emoji. And if it's high priority, I want to output red. And if it's medium priority, I want to output yellow. You could write 3 if statements all in one big long formula, but that's a lot of work. And honestly, it gets a little complicated. Why not make it easier with the switch? So you can think of the switch function as an if statement, but just a simplified if statement for unnecessarily complicated if combinations. So in our case, we just want to say, hey, I just want to look at the priority field. And depending on what it is, I want to output something. Let's do that. Switch formula, just like before, we're going to start with a blank or a clean formula, and we're going to start by writing switch. We see it drop up right here, and we can select that. Notice that switch will take an expression, and these brackets here on the syntax can get a little complicated, but here's the gist of what we're doing. We're going to point this function at a particular expression. And then based on what we find there, we're going to output something. That's all you really need to know about this, except for the fact that you can also assign a default value, which we're going to assign as well, just so that you can see it in practice. So let's go ahead and get started. Remember what we did last time. We started with the function with an open and closed parenthesis. I'm going to do that again, and I'm going to hit carriage return so that we can do this line by line. Now, what's the expression that we care about? We care about the priority field. So I'm going to start typing priority, and I'll select that field. And just as it did last time, that will turn purple. As a quick reminder, this indicates to us that we are referencing a field. Now, that's our expression. We want to look at the priority field, comma, next part of the function. What do we want to say? Well, if that priority is low, and again, this has to match exactly. Notice that because I'm dealing with a string again, it's in quotations. If it's low, I want to output green. So I'm going to do this on the same line just because it'll make it easier to read. I'm going to bring up my emojis again, and I'm going to look for green. So I'm just going to drop in this green circle here. So what are we doing? Let's break this down. We're going to reference that priority field. Then there's a comma. Then we look at if it is low, then we output green circle. Cool. Let's do this 2 more times. If it is medium, then we're going to output yellow circle inside of quotations. Remember, always add your emojis and any text or string inside of quotations because the quotation marks is what's telling Airtable that this is string. And here's high, our last one. And here we're going to output red, again, inside of the quotations. Let's find the red circle and drop it in. So what have we done? Looking at the priority field. If it is this, then be this. If it is this, then be this. If it is this, then be this. Notice that we have not put a default in. What is default? Well, default is optional. And if none of the conditions are met, then it's going to output our default value. In between each one of these things that we're adding, note that we're just dropping commas. Let's make our default value a black circle. Here it is. Drop that in. This is an optional field. I'm going to use it just so we can highlight what it does. So let's go ahead and save this function. And just like that, you'll see that based on the priority that we've selected, we're going to output the color thanks to the switch function. If I make a change, the color from the switch function changes as well. What if I don't have anything? If I have nothing, none of my conditions are met, so it assigns the default value, the black circle. So just like that, we've completed the switch function with an optional default value that you may or may not use depending on your circumstance. But switch, going to be your best friend, way easier than writing what we call nested if statements, because if we had to do if statements for this, we would have had to combine 3 of them just to get the output. That would have been a hairy mess. Much simpler to write one switch function. That's your second key formula takeaway. Now let's do a little bit of date calculations because Airtable is fantastic for project management and task management, and understanding how far away something is really helpful information, especially when tracking dates and times. So we're going to take a look at the date-time difference, and this time we're going to reference the deadline field. Notice again, in Airtable, whenever we write a formula, we're referencing entire fields, not specific cells. So, date-time difference, I want to know how far away is the deadline in days. As of the recording of this video, I am doing this on February 22nd. So when we look at something like February 24th, 2026, we would expect an output to tell us 2 days away. So what we're going to be looking at is putting together a simple formula that tells us how many days away the deadline is from today's date. So let's get to work. We're going to go in, use a new field, formula, blank it out, make sure you're starting from scratch, and we're going to start with date time diff. Date time underscore diff, open, close, parenthesis. That's what we're looking for, and here is the syntax. We're going to start with a from, we're going to give it a to, and we're going to tell it units. So in our case, we're looking at the deadline, comparing it to today, and we want to know in days, how far away is that? So let's get to work. First, I'm going to start writing deadline. That's the name of my field here. So again, it turns purple. We're referencing an entire field. Comma, next line. Where are we going to? In our case, we're going to today. This is a function inside of a function because the today formula allows Airtable to find out whatever the current day is. So in this case, as I said, February 22nd, do keep in mind that without some fancy formula functions and settling time zones, the today output will be looking at Greenwich Mean Time, that is London time. So be aware of that when you're putting this together. If you want to get more specific in when that ticks over to the next day, you're going to need a more advanced formula that takes into account time zones and all of that. But for us, we're going to settle with Greenwich Mean Time. It's good enough for this formula. So that's the today. So we have so far our from variable, that's deadline, our to variable, that's today, and then lastly, we need our units. Units are going to go inside of quotes, either single or double quotes, and you could write anything from minutes to days to weeks to months, etc. I care about how many days away this thing is, so days. That's it. I've got all of the required fields here. We can save this up, and just like that, it does the math for us. This is 2 days away from February 22nd. This is 17 days away, and this is 24 days away. Now we can use this output to give us more advanced information about when a task is overdue. Maybe we want to change colors for a task based on how far away it is. You get the idea. This allows us a lot of functionality inside of our workflows. One bonus for you here is understanding that in this case, since we're referencing the deadline field, if deadline is blank, it will throw an error on our formula output. Because what we're going to do is, if we have no deadline, it's going to say, well, I can't calculate that. NaN stands for not a number. So, as just a bonus here, if you want to get rid of possible errors, as you see in this case when I removed the deadline here, well, then we can combine this with an if statement. So for example, let's copy this whole thing. And what I'll do is I'll say if, and I will say, first of all, if deadline exists, that is, if we have a value in the deadline field, then I want to output the calculation that we just built. And if I don't have a deadline, then I don't want to do anything. So that's fine. Let's just blank it out. So if you recall in our if statement, if logic, this is the first part, if deadline exists, then we're going to do this. And if deadline doesn't exist, then we're going to do blank, nothing, doesn't exist. So only when there's a deadline will we calculate how many days away it is. And this now combines two functions so that we don't have errors. But once a deadline is filled out here, there we go. It shows us almost immediately how far away that date is. These are the 3 key formulas for any Airtable beginner, and I hope you got a ton of value from watching this video. If you have questions that we did not address here, swing by our website because we've put a ton of resources together for you to help you with your next Airtable build. That's it for this one. I hope you enjoyed it. Give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content like this, but most importantly, keep on building.